Americans will always want some level of inequality because it's a representation of meritocracy. People who work hard and sacrifice and save their money and make major contributions, we think that they should earn a little more and they should have more resources, and that's fine. But we also, however, have to have a floor under which nobody falls. And if you're below that, especially if you're a child and you're below that, we are not going to accept that. You do have the right to health care and to education and to decent housing and to quality food at all times.
Well, that is a brand new ad from cable network MSNBC, put out today in the wake of fierce criticism that has been leveled against the host shown there. In this latest ad, that host seems to double down on what critics have called a socialist viewpoint. They put out these little vignettes of their hosts arguing for left-leaning principles, and she put out one the other day that took a lot of fire. In that one, you could hear that she's talking about how those who sacrifice and work hard, they should earn a little more. That's what she thinks they're entitled to, but that there should be a floor. Well, the thing that got all this started was an ad that she put out a couple of days ago, arguing that children in this country don't really belong to their parents and instead calling for the larger community to take charge. Here's that.
We have never invested as much in public education as we should have because we've always had kind of a private notion of children. Your kid is yours and totally your responsibility. We haven't had a very collective notion of these are our children. So part of it is we have to break through our kind of private idea that kids belong to their parents or kids belong to their families and recognize that kids belong to whole communities. Once it's everybody's responsibility and not just the households, then we start making better investments.
Today, in a written piece, she doubles down, those are her words, on that assertion and makes no apologies for it. Joining me now, Monica Crowley, who's a radio talk show host, and Kirsten Powers, who's a Daily Beast columnist. Both are Fox News contributors. Kirsten, some of the left say this is no big deal. It's no big whoop that we would say the community would help a family raise a child. But is that what she really was arguing in that piece?
Well, I think probably the problem that some people have with it is the collective, reference to the collective. And to say that children don't really belong to their parents, I think is a pretty provocative thing to say. I certainly do believe that the community plays a role. I think we do pay a lot for education. Actually, I don't have children, and that's not an accident. I love my friends' children. I love my nieces. I try to be as helpful as I can, but they really aren't my responsibility.
Right.
They're the responsibility of the people who choose to have them. If one of my friends decides to have 5 children, that's really not my responsibility. I will help out as much as I can.
You pay your taxes and so on.
Yeah, exactly. But, look, I pay taxes for schools, and I don't have children in schools. So how much more am I expected to do, really? I guess that would be my question.
That's what I want to ask you, Monica, because Kyle Wingfield in the Atlantic Journal-Constitution comes out with a piece today that's very interesting, talking about this, quote, collectivist rant. And he posits that she is completely inventing the notion she is arguing against, saying there's never been any dispute that, of course, the community also cares about children, and that's why we pay taxes that go to education, and that's why the United States pays more for education than any other country in the world, according to studies cited therein. And so he says she's setting up a false premise because it's really actually more consistent with a left-leaning belief that what we're doing, it needs to go way beyond that.
Right. Yes, that's exactly the point, Megan, that she's actually laying groundwork for a far more radical idea. I mean, there are two really disturbing notions here. First, that a child is a piece of property to be owned and controlled by the state rather than raised by the parents. And the second point, which I think is a bigger and even more disturbing one, if there can be a more disturbing one, is that this is what statists do, and this is how they think. They're always trying to socially engineer us into what they sell as a utopia, but which actually has no relation to a utopia at all, but which is really all about government power and control over you, your family, and your life. So they have always been, and we've seen this throughout totalitarian systems throughout history, they're always trying to move you from the individual to the collective, from individual freedom to mass enslavement, and away from religion toward worshiping a secular state.
Not always trying to move you from the individual to the collective, because when it comes to the issue of abortion, Ms. Perry does not believe that it should have anything to do with the collective. She believes it is completely the individual. And that is a hypocrisy of hers that some have pointed out in the wake of this debate. In her piece, quote, doubling down, that's her term, on this assertion that, you know, our kids belong to the communities and not to the parents today, she says the following, Kirsten. On the abortion issue, we agree that kids are not the property of their parents. Their lives matter to all of us. Okay, so she says kids' lives matter to all of us. Well, she found herself in hot water not long ago for the following clip that was played on that network, and I ask you whether her detractors are going to believe that she actually believes babies' lives matter to all of us.
On our uterus model, Nancy, you know, they have a little fertilized, oh no, that might be bad. I seem to have popped open the fertilized egg. We'll put that back together.
I think you're okay.
Right. But the very idea that this would constitute a person, right, and that some set of constitutional rights should come to this. Look, I get that that is a particular kind of faith claim. It's not associated with science. But the reality is that if this turns into a person, right, there are economic consequences, right? The cost to raise a child, $10,000 a year, up to $20,000 a year, when you're talking about what it actually costs to have this thing turn into a human. Why not allow women to make the best choices that we can with as many resources and options instead of trying to come in and regulate this process?
This thing, she says, as she's holding a model of an embryo.
Right. Well, first of all, she said so many things that are so empirically false in such a short amount of time. It's not true that the only people who oppose abortion oppose it because it's a faith claim. There's plenty of scientific reasons to oppose abortion. Primarily, it is a human being. That is a scientific fact. It is alive. That is also a scientific fact. Now, it will also turn into a human unless something happens, but most of the time it turns into something that looks a lot like the three of us eventually. So, you know, but what I think is more troubling, though, is that she sort of makes that argument, but then sort of pushes it aside and almost is saying, whether it is a human or not a human, women really should decide that because it could be too expensive.
Yeah, it should be up to the mother to make the decision based on finances.
That's not a moral argument. Like, don't go through this whole thing about how, you know, like, make your argument linear. It's a human, we don't care, people should be able to end the life because it's too expensive. I mean, that is essentially what she was saying, but she kind of went around of like trying to also kind of prove that it's not a human, even though the holding up the little thing, that doesn't prove that it's not a human. Mm-hmm. But it's still a human.
But to come out now, Monica, and say, you know, this is a quote. We agree that kids are not the property of their parents. Their lives matter to all of us. This thing.
Right, referring to human beings as pieces of property. Now, we fought an entire civil war, Megyn, to make sure that human beings were not considered property by the state or by anybody. And here's this woman, I mean, the double standard and the hypocrisy here. When she's talking about abortion and referring to a human being as a, quote, thing and kind of laughing about it, there she's saying, well, the woman, there should be no state intervention here. The woman should have the right to choose what to do with that thing, except when that baby crosses over and that baby is then born, then the baby is no longer your thing. It belongs to the state. I mean, this is really radical thinking. And like I said, Megyn, we have seen this throughout history in totalitarian regimes where they go in and actually take the babies, they wrench them to try to abolish the family, to make the state the #1 entity, and that you are all in service of the state and worshiping the state. That's what we're talking about here.
She is not only a cable news host, but she is a professor at Tulane University. And that is her belief system. So we let it stand, or we let it fall, or rise on its own merits. Panel, thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.